Hello, thanks for listening to the Finance Leadership Podcast. It's the latest updated news about the Finance Leadership Programme. It's produced by AICPA and CIMA, together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more at aicpa.org and cimaglobal.com. As usual, you're listening to myself, Kevin Gormley, and today I'm joined by Iryna McDonald from Kaplan. Iryna joined us on the podcast about a year ago, so great to have you back.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
And today we are going to talk about the upcoming MCS exam, which is in August. So can we talk a little bit about the MCS and the pre-scene and what's this exam about?
Absolutely. I think this pre-scene is lovely and is so relatable. So you're given a company called Flathole that operates residential buildings for students called PBSAs, Purpose-Built Student Accommodation. And I think it's very good for the students. So some of you might have stayed in student accommodation. Some of you might be renting now. So the principles of living out of your home somewhere else are relatable to anyone. And that's why I think this case study is so good, because it's easy to understand the industry. And when it's easy to understand the industry, then it's easy for you to write an answer because you can imagine yourself in those circumstances. And though the country where Flathole operates is a fictional one, Poland, the trends in this country seem to be fairly familiar, as in lots of students are seeking higher education. Government is encouraging that by giving students loans. And of course, the accommodation providers, PBSA providers, will benefit from that. So when looking at Flathole specifically, do be mindful that we're the biggest operator in the PBSA industry, which gives us economies of scale. We have the reputation. And though the market is competitive, companies in the industry are not competing on price because demand for accommodation exceeds supply. So as long as you provide high quality, you are certain to get your students, you are certain to utilize capacity of your buildings. And of course, relationships with universities will also help because universities refer students to PBSA providers such as Flathole. So looking at Flathole, it seems to be doing well. As a listed company, it of course needs to provide shareholder returns. And we're given 2 years of financial statements. And it appears that year on year, our sales are going up, our profit is going up. So company is in a healthy financial position. And actually, you could even do a bit of comparison with its closest competitor, Tutor. Again, you're given financial statements for Tutor in the pre-scene. So both companies have grown, but Tutor profits have dropped, whereas our profits, Flathole profits, have grown. So therefore, Flathole must be doing something right in its industry.
That's a good overview, Iryna. As you say, it's totally relatable. As someone who has a son about to go to university, I can confirm that anyone providing accommodation will be in a healthy financial position based on the costs that have been emailed to me in recent weeks. So clearly, demand will always outstrip supply in this sector. So if I was a student preparing for this case, how could I use past papers?
Past papers are immensely useful because it gives you ideas about what has been asked before for similar organizations, sometimes in similar industries, and therefore you have a better guess at what might come up. And though we could never predict what exactly you're going to get, but we could draw some parallels. So a good exam to look at is May-August 2020 exam. And that was focused on a company called Alpaca. They were a luxury hotel. I know that Flathole isn't a hotel, but we provide accommodation. Alpaca in the previous exam was also providing accommodation. So there are quite a lot of similarities between those industries. And therefore, it's easier to see how previous questions could relate to the current exam. So, for example, in that previous paper on Alpaca, you had to review financial and non-financial aspects of two investment options. You had to think about the importance of scenario planning and sensitivity analysis. You had to consider importance of teamwork Let's think about what happens with flat hole. We, of course, could have investment opportunities, opening new PBSA, or updating existing PBSAs with new facilities, for example, putting gyms or canteens within our premises. We might need to think about sensitivity analysis. What if the cost of setting up the PBSA are higher than expected? If we overspend by a certain amount, will our project become unviable? We need effective teams within our PBSA. We have concierges that provide the service to our students, see them face to face. We have cleaners. We have customer service working remotely, addressing additional problems. They, of course, need to work together in order to make sure that we have this differentiating factor, the good experience for our students. So I would advise students to go through past exam papers. This is just one of the examples, because that will outline for you what kind of circumstances examiner could develop in questions, how the information from pre-seen could be used to build new scenarios, and it also gives you realistic types of requirements as in what you have been asked to do. There is no guarantee that you'll be asked to do the same thing in the current exam, but it broadens your understanding of the way that past exam questions have been put together.
That makes sense. At CIMA, we're used to the most diverse and unusual companies for pre-seen. And with the current round of exams, we have security companies, we have saddle makers, and we have flat hole. So out of the three, this is the one I'd want as well, to be quite honest, in terms of domain knowledge and relatability, I guess. And don't forget, that past paper will be available on the CIMA Study Hub. So in your view, what's the value of mock exams as a tool to prepare?
Mock exams are invaluable because many students walk into the exam thinking, oh, I know what I want to say, but knowing what you want to say and actually saying it are two different things. Mock exams give you different types of scenarios and questions as in what could be developed on the day of the exam based on pre-seen information. Could flat hole possibly expand abroad outside Thailand? No problem. Examiner could give you this. What if one of our PBSAs is underperforming? How will we identify what constitutes underperformance? How we're going to turn this around? So mock exams give you that wider range of scenarios that you need to prepare yourself for. And thinking about those scenarios and coming up with ideas in your head is just the first step. Because a big challenge in this exam is actually putting your ideas on paper and writing them out, explaining it fully. In our professional jobs, we have to stand in front of people, deliver presentations, use persuasive communication. But we need to now demonstrate whether we could do this within the constraints of the exam, within those 45 minutes per task. So mock exams will help you to tick all the boxes. It will ensure that you understand the pre-seen because you need to build on the foundations of flat hole. It will make sure that you are happy with reacting to new information because there may be new situations in the mock exam that you haven't thought about, and your ability to think on the spot, think outside the box is what mock exam will be able to develop. And of course, it will help you to develop your written communication skills, your persuasiveness to make sure that your arguments resonate. Finally, it's always useful to get feedback from the markers because even if you're doing well, there is room for improvement. And if you get your feedback early on, there is more time for you to improve. It could be technical knowledge that's lacking. It could be the exam technique. It could be clarity of your argument. Could be writing more concisely, but if you get the feedback early, you could work on the areas that could help you to succeed.
And a couple of other things I'll throw in there, Iryna. We've done a lot of research into how students perform in terms of submitting mocks and then the end result. And we have seen clear evidence that anyone who submits at least one mock has twice the chances of passing case study exam than those who do not. So for anyone listening who's on the Finance Leadership Programme at the moment and is deciding potentially not to submit a mock, you're just halving your chances. And we've compared data over a number of windows over the last couple of years, and the correlation's very strong. So please listen submit a mock exam, at least one mock exam. Try and do more than that if you can, because the more you invest, the more you get simply. So obviously within the Finance Leadership Programme, we tell students to start preparing for the case study around 6 or 7 weeks before the exam to allow them sufficient time to prepare adequately.
Absolutely. As early as possible. Yeah. So currently we're preparing for the August exam and we just have about a month to do it. But by this time, we would need to make sure that as a student, you are comfortable with the pre-scene. You know how Flat Hole operates. So when you're reading the pre-scene, you're not just skimming through going, oh, I could see that Flat Hole is a listed company. Because what might that mean? The fact that they've got shareholders, a share price, that they have to follow corporate governance rules, that they need to think about integrated reporting, the fact that they could raise extra finance through bonds or through right issues. So every single fact you question, you understand the implications of this. And when you look at those implications, go, okay, if I'm asked a question about sources of finance, take into account that Flat Hole is a listed company, what am I going to say? So having thought through this, you will then build up a range of different topics that could be possible. We already said that then practicing mock exams will be your next step. So you think you know the topic, you think you understand what it means. Mock exam will give you a chance to prove this and you get feedback. We also talked about the importance of practicing past exam questions to widen your understanding of the kind of questions that have been asked and the range of topics that you need to be prepared.
So we did analysis on students who finished 2 weeks before their exam, which is the minimum, because obviously under FLP rules, 2 weeks before your exam window, if you haven't completed your level learning, your exam gets cancelled. So we compared those students who just finished with a minimum amount of time and students who finished 6 or 7 weeks before. Those who finished 6 or 7 weeks passed at twice the rate of those who did not, which obviously sounds very logical. And I know things get in the way and work gets in the way and things happen. But by finishing much earlier, you just afford yourself so much more time to prepare, do the things that matter, do the things that are important, like the core activities, the mock exams, and then move into preparing your mind and other things around the exam. But it's really, really important you double your chances if you finish on time with your level learning.
And just for the FLP students in particularly, because when you're going through the competencies, you're acquiring that knowledge. But do remember that case study exams are about application of it. So if you don't understand the concept, if you haven't done your competencies yet, you're going to struggle for the management case to apply it. Okay? So actually completing your competencies in good time, possibly even before you start thinking about the case study exam, is best.
Yeah. So this may be their first exam, but there will be a lot of students also who maybe sat the operational case study. They have the experience, they've gone through that exam, and now they're on MCS. So in terms of approach, how to position their answers, is there much of a difference in your view?
I think there is a significant difference in operational case study and the management case study. So for those of you that have done operational, the advantages are that you're already familiar with the exam platform, you already understand the difference between pre-seen and unseen material. But generally what I notice is that students often struggle with the larger body of knowledge. And then the higher level exam means you have covered a greater volume of content, and therefore the range of questions on the greater volume of content also becomes larger. So actually you need to know more about a larger body of topics. So a good grasp of underlying technique, as we've just discussed, completing the competencies on time, knowing the technical aspects would help. Secondly, we need to consider the actual volume of information given to you in the exam. So the unseen volumes are becoming considerably larger. Not only we have information in the body of the task, many tasks also have a reference material attached to them of considerable size. So reading and absorbing the information very quickly, because you only have 45 minutes to understand the whole task as well as the right answer, is essential. We also need to consider application. At the operational level, great emphasis was on technical knowledge and demonstrating what the concept means, whereas at management level, marks for the explanation of concept are very limited. The examiner expects you to apply it, explain your knowledge in that specific task setting, scenario setting. So actually, by default, when you come to management case, every single argument you write needs to be directly related to flat hole. If it's not mentioning student accommodation, if it's not mentioning flat hole specific factors, you're probably missing that mark. Also, arguments need to be much further developed. So we need a detailed explanation behind each of your ideas. And here I would advise the students to check whether the word because would fit in their sentence. And then flat hole could raise finance from, let's say, the stock market because they're a listed company and therefore could do a rights issue. So you can't just say we could raise finance from the stock market. You need to explain the point in more detail, but also succinctly to be able to save time. And that all creates a lot of time pressure. 45 minutes per task flies by very, very quickly. You blink it, you miss it. So practicing questions, doing mocks is essential to improve that speed.
Time management is obviously a major concern in the MCS. I hear it again and again. As you've just described, the volume of content, the complexity of the answers, 45 minutes is a blink of an eye, and then sometimes the multi-part questions. So one question could contain 3 questions, for example, and you have to answer the 3 questions within the one. So have you any tips or hints for time management?
So in order to manage the time in the exam, firstly, we need to avoid wasting time. So coming to the exam, you do pretty much need to know flat hole precinct like the back of your hand. There may be an occasional need to look up a figure, but you need to orient yourself in precinct pretty well to be able to locate that figure is needed. But otherwise, you need to have a solid grasp of what's going on. Secondly, to avoid wasting time reading the scenario and possibly reference materials several times, I would suggest the student need to start reading the task by looking at the requirements, subtasks. They're clearly bullet pointed. And when reading those, think about what is examiner asking about? What are the key components of the question requirements I need to pay attention to? What is the percentage and therefore what is the number of marks allocated to each of the subtasks? So you remember when to move on and give the appropriate amount of time to each of the requirements, each of the components to make sure that you maximize the available marks. You also have the timer at the top of your screen, so keep that timer in your mind. So on average, out of 45 minutes available per task, I would say you need about 9 for reading and planning. And we're going to talk about planning in a moment. And then the rest will be for writing to get the balance right. And I know that some students go, oh my God, we're so time pressured, we have no time to plan. I would disagree. I think planning is actually that time-saving technique. Because if you launch yourself straight into the writing of your answer, you don't quite know where you're going, how many arguments you want to produce, how they will be structured, and that results in repetition, generic arguments, and therefore time wasted. So if you invest those 4 to 5 minutes by saying, okay, those are the key components of the requirements, those are the key aspects from scenario that I want to develop in my answer, you build yourself that pathway. It gives you confidence, it reduces repetition, it gives you control over time, and that will make sure that you perform well. Do remember that if you try to spend more than 45 minutes per task, that's not going to happen in the exam because the system will move you on to the next task when 45 minutes are up. However, on the other hand, if you look at the task and go, you know what, don't know what I want to say about it, let's move on. If you move to the next task, you can never go back. You can never add something to your previous answer. So 45 minutes per task means 45 minutes. So use it to do your best in every single task that you're going to attempt.
spoken to a lot of students, and it's always one of the mantras I enforced was spend a significant amount of time planning your answer, because you'll have a much more consistent, well thought out, structured answer. Because who wants to read random thoughts on a page when a good piece of structured narrative is much easier to read and also to award marks as an examiner? So yeah, very, very important, Iryna. Thank you very much for your invaluable input for anyone sitting in the MCS. And obviously this is the last window for Flat Hall. So if you're repeating this, hopefully you find it useful in terms of hints and tips. So thanks for taking the time to speak with us today, Iryna. I appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule. There's plenty more to explore about study and preparing for the exam in the show notes. View them, just click on the episode's info icon in the podcast app or on your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your computer's web browser. For more information, go to enrolled.cgma.org or go to our website, AICPA-CIMA.com. If you know a friend or colleague who could use this information, feel free to share it with your networks to see the sharing icons in the podcast app. That's it for now. We'll have another podcast available next month. Thank you for listening. For now, all the best. Goodbye.
This content is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA, the Association, or CIMA. It is provided with the understanding that they are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA, the Association, and CIMA make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.